in this dialogue, the Lord maintains, as he always does, complete dignity and manages to throw the ball back into their court. He answers by asking another question that he knows they can't answer. He knows that there is no point in answering the question as they want him to, about the source of his authority, because the problem is not that at all. It's them. And the same thing can happen to us. Many people, either in conversation, in person, or now in virtual conversation on screens, in the social media, blogging and all that goes with it, even holy people, do a lot of that. A lot of energy and time going into some form of dialogue which is missing the point and absorbing, therefore, much useless, or rather useful, energy. Beware. We don't have to get involved with every conversation. Often those who speak less are listened to more. And they have also the right answer which hits the real point. What is the real point? The real point is we get all of us home. Just the other day we had a shock because somebody who'd stayed with me for quite a while actually was found dead. And she was still young. Her heart, it seems, stopped beating. But she was a person of prayer, and they found the rosary beads actually in her hand. But it hit me strongly that it's important that we never lose sight of that. Getting home. And you people growing up, remember, that is the issue. All life is a preparation for heaven. And all we do must always be in that optic of getting home. So nothing which puts that at risk must ever be undertaken, e.g. relationships which become dangerous. I think you know what I mean. I want to go into one or two things which remind us of that. Heaven is closer to us than we think. The frontier is very thin at times. And do you not think that actually right now the frontier is almost non-existent? When Jesus comes into your home, he doesn't come alone. There are lots and lots of angels. Already we have our own angel with us, so we're double the number. But in a minute now we'll have a whole throng of angels right here in the room, waiting for the Lord to land. And be aware that that is also what we have to carry away with us. Don't change mood or mode straight away. E.g., what we receive on the tongue has to be always in our mind afterwards, that that tongue doesn't get used for anything which is not worthy to be a throne. Bad words or whatever it might be. We give our tongue to Jesus and we hand it over also that he may control it at all times. No compartment for him and then the rest for me. This I opened up today. It was something which came in a Christmas box from close friends. The best time to read is just before going to sleep, because you won't sleep a wink. It's a hair stand on end. Stories from the beyond. Now, I know the church is talking about. It's in Rome. It's the only Gothic church in Rome. It's near the Vatican actually, and there's a museum in it. There's one part of it which is dedicated to the souls in purgatory, and you've got exhibits from the beyond, fingerprints burning and that kind of thing. Now I just want to tell you one or two things to remind you of the fact that the frontier isn't that thick, because we're offering Holy Mass this evening for the Holy Souls, and precisely we're thinking about all those who have gone before us in the past year and beyond. And I was listening actually only on Saturday to one or two things that they were telling me, experiences from the beyond. Well, we all know that Our Lady came close to earth through little children in 1917. It was during the Great War. What people are less aware of is that that's not the only time that she was, as it were, around in that period. She showed the children, of all things, even though they were tiny, the fires of hell, and wanted that there should be this extra bit put in the rosary about the fires of hell and about the saving of souls, so precisely as to have in mind that this is the issue throughout the world. Never forget the issue, all the rest can wait, including Christmas trees. Well, other things were going on at the same time, and one understands how, actually. If you can imagine what was going on in the First World War, there was a huge number of young men going into the beyond in vast numbers altogether. And so there was very little in the way of a frontier. And heaven was very much concerned. Well, what happened in 1915 was very curious. It was in August. Things were closing in because the Germans were doing very well. They were coming. It was working perfectly, the strategy of getting bit by bit into and around Paris. One bit was falling after another because the others weren't ready for them at that stage. And they were within 60 and at one point actually 40 kilometers of Paris. And there were very few soldiers in Paris able to do anything about it. Really, there was only the resistance. So, it was a hopeless case. Now, what happened is curious. And this is the detail I wasn't aware of. People were being wounded and ending up in military hospitals. And in this particular situation, there was a nurse. She was actually French, but she knew German, at least enough to understand what was being said. And she heard this. It was obviously a Catholic place, and there was a statue of Our Lady in the form of the statue of the Immaculate Conception with the outreached arms like this. And she heard two wounded German soldiers or officers kind of whispering this amongst themselves. "That's the lady we saw." Now, they were presumed to be discussing amongst themselves, and no one was supposed to hear, because what had happened was this. Something had happened at that point near Paris, and immediately the German authorities had strictly forbidden that anything should be said about it under pain of... And so no one did. Only one actually did before he died. As he was dying, it was a German military chaplain, Catholic priest, who said yes, she appeared, and he gave the details. She appeared on a cloud, and she was doing this towards the Germans. And I heard on the grapevine that also it was seen from behind, not allowing the French to go back any further. And at that point, an inexplicable, complete U-turn took place. The whole German army took another direction and did not do what they could have done, conquer Paris. It's called the miracle of the Marne, the miracle de la Marne. Actually, the Germans knew about it when it came to the beginning of the Second World War, within the military world, secretly, and there had been this instruction as they were going into war: there will be no miracle of the Marne. Shush. But this then is an indication that heaven is interested in what goes on in earth, and especially when it comes to things which regard the passage of the soul. I want to quote just one or two things because it illustrates this point. When the soul goes out of the body, and this starts off with modern experiences of people having that experience, near-death experience, that they all have the same initial experience of looking down from on high, the body down there. That's universal. What happens after varies according to the experience of each one, but they all seem to move on. They often see some kind of light in the distance. Some are actually met by relatives. It all depends what happens to each one, but there are certain things in common. And the initial feeling is one of well-being because there's no more pain. But then this author goes into what is going on once the soul is separated and boils it down to essentially the two classic alternatives. It's got to go somewhere. So is it homeward bound or not when it leaves? And it becomes quite clear from what it's telling that the soul itself at that point immediately grasps its own situation and sees the consequences and propels itself either towards or against what it's been working for. What is clear is the soul cannot stop existing, but its existence becomes totally conscious at that point. It's fully aware without distraction. Now, therefore, the vast majority, if they're going to make it, that is, they're going to heaven eventually, will go to where they have to go to get ready. That'll depend on what they've done in this world. But there are some who don't make it. And what is interesting is the point where those who really shouldn't be there are just saved by some mercy of God through your prayer or whatever, because God is outside time, and they get into this part which is strange. It looks like hell, but it's not. It's actually the lowest level of purgatory. At least only there, they say to themselves. But it can last a long time. There are examples, but I won't go into them. One would be maybe Henry VIII. I presume that he'd been lost, but I heard somewhere that he'd had, because of his condition of illness, the time to reflect just before he was dying, and something must have happened between him and God, which meant that, according to what I heard, I know is true, that he went actually to that level and will be there until the end of the world as we know it. But even there, at least it's not the other place. Now, that region there, even though we talk about regions, it's for us beyond understanding because geography isn't quite the same out there. Nevertheless, there is movement and there are factors. And it would seem that that area there, the frontier on that side is very thin as well, and the element of hell and purgatory at that point is something which is difficult for us to imagine. It's not forever, and that's what makes the huge difference. They're getting purified. But it's serious stuff, and we need to be aware of it. We don't need that in our life and in our eternity, and no one needs it. Getting them out of there, that is stopping them from going there, is the one issue that we need to bear in mind. All the rest in life is secondary compared with that. And by the way, they say that hell and purgatory, at least that level of it, works on the same heating system. So eventually, if they're down there, they'll get purified, and purified. But there are some who are stuck for a long time, and out of the special mercy of God, are able to make it known that they're in trouble. It might be through a dream, but it might be through some kind of making himself manifest. And to us, it appears as a ghost. They are spirits making known, because they can't do anything about it, that they need help. Therefore, we listen seriously to these things. And that's where we priests come into it sometimes, because sometimes there are places where things go wrong, things moving and whatnot, and one tries to get to the origin of it. Because it's always been there in human history. But then, as time goes on, they're getting purified, and the pain element coming from the senses, making up for what they've abused with the senses in this world. It's rather like this. You might have your sins forgiven, the guilt is taken away, but you've taken something from creation, from God. It's out of order. You've, as it were, filched something. That has to be paid back. It was out of order. So that's coming back to us in proportion in purgatory. It's the pain of sense. But then that also is purified. And the last bit, the closest bit to heaven, where they're still stuck quite a long time, sometimes depending, is only one bit left, the pain of desire. They can't bear the weight, they just want to go to God that they've been made for. And there they are, and there sometimes they can be also exchanged, help. If we help them, they can help us. Sometimes things go on. It's a strange, strange world, but it's a whole real world. But in the meantime, things have happened and still happen now and again. This book has pictures of this kind of thing going on, where you might have a priest saying his prayers, and this fingerprint comes on from the beyond and lands on just the text of the Requiem Mass. In other words, that's where he needs prayer. Soul's gone on. I could tell all kinds of stories about that, but it's not the time now to do it. Just be aware that these are all mercies of God. That if that happens, they are really in trouble, and the Lord allows them to make it known. Just say one last story. It did happen. It happened to a priest. It was something which happened one night. He was in prayer in church, and he closed the church, went to his bed after saying his prayers, and went to the presbytery, but he'd forgotten something and came back later that night, that evening, opened the church, and the church was full of people. And looked at them and he said, "How did you get in?" They all looked like this. He repeated, "Who let you in?" They seemed to be looking in one direction, at the altar. He scratched his head and went back in despair. What on earth was that about? Later, because he couldn't believe his eyes, sometime later he came back to see if they were still there. No one there. The church was completely empty. It happened. The following morning he went to a wise priest friend of his to say what had happened. He just calmly said, they were holy souls, doing part of their purgatory where they had offended. They had probably been talking at one stage in church in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, and now they were making up for it by not being able to talk, just looking at the Blessed Sacrament. There, the frontier is very